just up about the part where anyway I'm going to lose reception, even though I've been making videos this whole ride. And I think it's worthwhile. This was something I've been thinking about this morning. We kind of made an introduction the first half hour, so now we're going to go into the next. Got about a half hour till we get to work. What do we have to say about this question about learning from the past? I think this is a very, very important question, because it's so misunderstood. If you didn't see the first video, I mentioned an article that I read that, back in February. It's already June. It's hard to believe. Wow. Where this fellow was admitting that he was being curmudgeonly, and he was speaking rather tongue-in-cheek, but it's obvious what his basic idea was there. As he was saying, what do we need President's Day for? How do you celebrate President's Day? You put on a powdered wig and knickers. I mean, I wear knickers on Shabbos, but a powdered wig and knickers, and you own slaves. And that was really the crux of what he wanted to say, is like, basically, those people who lived 200 years ago, forget about them. 250 years ago, forget about them. We have nothing to learn from them. We shouldn't be celebrating them because they were just evil slave owners, and that's it, and there's nothing to learn. And the foolishness in a statement like that cannot be missed. It's an extremely foolish thing to say. This person thinks he's so smart saying something like this. It's really totally ignorant and stupid. But there is a small kernel of goodness of a point in it, which the obvious kernel of goodness in it is, no, we do not own slaves anymore. Absolutely not. And most people are not wearing powdered wigs, and only a few people who are pretty fashionable like me wear knickers. It's not the point. That's not what we're talking about here. Is whether or not these aspects. But let's look at other aspects. I get an email. I get emails, things from newspapers like comic strips and things every day. One thing that I read is the Shilas and Shuvas, the responsa, the questions that are presented to Billy Graham. I didn't know he's even cognizant enough to still be writing, but sometimes his answers demonstrate wisdom, and sometimes they demonstrate beginnings of senility, and sometimes they demonstrate just his fundamentalist ideas, even though in certain things he's decided he was historically decidedly not a fundamentalist individual, Graham. And he's certainly an influential figure in American history. Someone sent him a question. I mean, you send a man like this a question, you know what kind of answer you're going to get. I don't know what did they expect. They expect, he's 90 years old, and we're finally going to get him to. I'm finally going to convince him that I'm right. A 30-year-old person, is writing this question, whatever it is. I mean, seriously, I don't know why. Unless you're really looking for an answer, why would you send a question like this to Billy Graham? I don't know. It's almost disrespectful, but he was somewhat graceful. I don't remember what the answer was exactly, thousands of years ago. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, they lived 240 some odd years ago, 250 years ago. What could they have to say about my life today? What impact could they have on my life today? What? Are you stupid to ask a question like that? It just demonstrates total ignorance of history. Because until things started changing, things didn't change for a long time. And all the things that you enjoy today, even as a liberal leftist, even as a total skeptic, whether agnostic or atheist, or as some practitioner of some new age spirituality, or whatever it is, and certainly, and just as much for people who practice traditional religion, everything that you enjoy today, in most places of the free world, not just in America, are thanks to people like Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, George Washington, I would even venture to say John Adams, Hamilton, certainly any number of the, I mean, if you leave out one of them, it's you know, all of these people, you know, this is why we're here. This is why we live like we do. You know, look at a man like Bono, you know, from U2. He always says, this is all I really know about him. I wouldn't know a song of his if you played it for me. I wouldn't be able. I probably recognize the song, but wouldn't know that it's from U2. You know, I really don't. I just don't know. You know, it's not. If you play me something from, I don't know, from Glenn Miller or Benny Goodman, then I know it. You know, but I you know, I've heard him both being quoted from the right and from the left, and it's true. And hearing him, but meaning both people presenting from the right and from the left, both presenting Bono as, oh, I didn't even read this record, I guess. Both presenting him as a role model in this aspect by saying America is not just a place, but it's an idea, and it's a gift that America gave to the whole world. And just like light is not diminished by sharing it, but only made stronger, so too that America shared the American ideals with the world, and that many people in the world have grabbed onto those ideals, demonstrates, you know, he's thankful to America for sharing these things to the world. Meaning, like Larry Arnn points out, our constitutional system has lasted longer than almost any other. Certainly in modern history, it's lasted longer than any other. And even in ancient times, even in biblical times, how many times, not that the Torah ever went away, but how many times the people left the Torah? How many times, you know, you look throughout the history of the kings of Judea, how it would go back and forth. This one did walk good in the eyes of the Lord, this one did evil in the eyes of the Lord. This one followed in the ways of his father David, and this one followed in the sins of Jeroboam, and so on and so forth, going back and forth from triumph to horror. And so, and yet our constitutional system, yes, there have been amendments to the Constitution, but our constitutional system was built in to allow for amendments, and it's continued for over 200 years. You know, never was the transfer of power through a bloody uprising. There were shades of it, but they were never able to totally, you know, there was a movie with Frank Sinatra that he regretted, called Suddenly, where he played a man who assassinated the president. And he was, I think he was, I only remember seeing the movie once or twice. And like I said, I mean, he made the movie in the 50s. I think it's 1955. The movie went into public domain largely because of the regret that the filmmakers had in making it. You know, after Kennedy's assassination. But because it went into the public domain, it became very accessible. And in the movie, the character that Sinatra played, and of course Sinatra loved Kennedy, you know, they were good friends, so it was, he especially felt remorse making this film, even though it's not his fault what happened, you know, and it was almost a decade earlier. But he felt that maybe it had some influence or something. His question is, does life imitate art? Does art imitate life? Although the question is also, which conspiracy theorists bring up, is art giving us hints? You know, meaning, are there powers that be that reveal to us certain secrets in art? And there are a lot of spooky things like that. In Malcolm Lahara, this is not the time or the place to discuss this issue with him. And there are plenty of other people who discuss this. This is not from my but what am I bringing out there is that the character that Sinatra played in this film, he said, I am not killing the president, I'm killing a man. Because after I kill him, someone else is going to be the president. Meaning, the depth of that statement is that the office of the presidency cannot be done away with bullets. Our constitutional, meaning that our constitutional system has so much security that a revolution with bloodshed, like the French Revolution or like the Russian Revolution, these things, they just are very difficult to happen in our system. We have so many safeguards against it that it's not impossible, but it's highly, highly improbable, and that was the wisdom of the founders. Meaning these men that you make fun of for wearing powdered wigs and wearing knickers, and that you despise for owning slaves, made it possible for you to live today with their tremendous wisdom. Now, does that mean that we honor their history? No. They didn't really want it themselves. People ask, why didn't Jefferson free his slaves upon his death? Washington did. And the answer was, he was not allowed to by law. Because anyone who, the Virginia law was that debtors were not allowed to free their slaves upon death. So Washington was able to maintain his estate, particularly because he passed away not too long after he left the presidency. And so he freed all of his slaves upon his passing. And Jefferson died in poverty, in debt, and was not allowed to by law. He wanted to change the law. He regretted that there was only one vote, that the original formation of the Constitution, he voted to get rid of slavery originally, Jefferson, and he was always lamented survived until the Civil War. If slavery had been abolished that soon. It's horrible and it's sad, but it's a reality. But, so too, I'll often say to people, often one of my arguments about Zionism, I'm not saying it's necessarily against Zionism, but against how Zionism is practiced politically, is that to be realistic, the idea of a Jewish state, it's not realistic, and that Jeffersonian ideals of religious freedom are much more stable and realistic for many reasons. Basically, people, I'm talking from a religious standpoint, when I'm talking to a religious Zionist, people are not going to be religious because the government shoves it down their throat. In fact, it's going to make them kick back and not want to have anything to do with religion, even the basics of religion. Which I think is part of the reason why the original secular founders of Israel agreed to certain status quo provisions, because they knew that they would really undermine popular support for religion among many people, because the government was intertwined with the synagogue. And it was really part of their plan to undermine Torah and to undermine Judaism. I understand the religious Zionists have a lofty goal, bringing Mashiach and making the world better, but it's unrealistic. It's dreamy. It's not going to happen. It's that way. We're going to have to rely on God more, a little bit more at least. You can't force things. You can't put what they say, a square peg into a round hole. Certain things just don't fit, and it's not a time and a place for it. And our sages knew that. That's why they were much more realistic. So when I bring that up and I say that I prefer an ideal of Jeffersonian freedom, we want to move to the Holy Land. Move to the Holy Land, but don't call it a Jewish state. Don't have a chief rabbinate that's an arm of the Jeffersonian way. Not talking in a just the tolerance that they have with the Misra Datot, which is the British approach, which is fine and good for the British, but it's not realistic. And we see, I mean, how many people in England go to the Church of England every week? Are the pews empty or full? I mean, just be realistic, Go to a Catholic country like Italy. How many people go to the Catholic Church every week? Go to America, where you have all different types of churches and synagogues and mosques and temples and all kinds of things. And compared to most other places in the free world, religion is vibrant because of the freedom, because religion is not resting on its laurels, but rather religion is operating in a spiritual free market. And like the free system is the business world stronger, so too it makes the religious world stronger. A lot of people are worried too much freedom is going to mean that people are going to be less religious, but what they forget is that that's the freedom that lets us be more religious, and we don't have bias in everybody. We don't own everybody, Hashem Baruch Anochim, I'm my brother's keeper. Yes and no. Yes and no. There is a certain truth that we're not our brother's keepers, 100%. We have there are aspects that we are our brother's keepers and aspects that we're not our brother's keepers. But the thing is when I bring that up, we should be Jeffersonian in our approach. So then the religious Zionists will answer me, but Jefferson owned slaves. And so my answer will be, but Rabbi Cook opposed movement suffrage. So do you throw out the teachings of Rabbi Cook because he opposed women's suffrage? Or you just put that aside and recognize he was a man of his time, and there were certain vestigial, there's a lie that goes around that in the really from Hasidic places the women don't vote. If anything, it's the women who run all the voting and everything in a place like Kiryas Yoli. It's all women who are working the polls in Kiryas Yoli. The women run the whole place there, basically. It's really a woman's world there. It's really, Susan B. Anthony, first wave feminism, being realized very, very openly. They're in the communities like Satmar, there's a very strong feminism that's actually feminist and not just trying to ape masculinity, but it's whatever. Alright, I'm not talking about that now. We're almost at work anyway, so what am I saying here? What's the point here? What are we discussing here? What did I want to bring out? I mentioned Rabbi Cook, and again, I don't agree with everything Rabbi Cook says, obviously. I mean, I think that should go without saying. I think people are aware of that. But he taught something that he emphasized a lot. Was that when Mashiach comes, and the thing is, Rambam says this, Satmar Rebbe brings this in Vayel Moshe, just in a different bechina, but he brings this from the Rambam. not just that the non-religious people have to do tshuva, not just that the secular people have to repent, but the religious people have to repent. We all have to do tshuva. And the Rambam says, Satmar Rebbe brings it, how do we know Mashiach is really here? Meaning, all the other stuff could be faked. The Zionists could gather the exiles, build a temple, start bringing sacrifices, crown somebody to be a king. And that's not the Mashiach that we're waiting for. That's Christ. No. But if we know everybody does tshuva, everybody repents, even the religious people also repent. Every heart is changed. That is when we know Mashiach is here. And the Rambam says that. So that means, and Rabbi Kook really, in a different approach, discusses that same idea. I would almost say lahavdil. But essentially, like we're saying, the religious people have things to learn from the non-religious people, and the non-religious people have things to learn from the religious people. We live in a world where there's one God who controls the fate of man and guides us in His love, and wants our society to get better. Does not, someone said to me, "Oh, a conservative just wants things to stay the same all the time." It's not true. A conservative wants to hold on to our heritage, hold on to the valuable things that we have, and discard the vestigial aspects. The Darwinists like to talk about vestigial organs, things that are left over, that are useless, and later we find out that they were there with God's wisdom. I know this is going to be offensive, but if you study what the Constitution says, it says that slavery is abolished except for punishment for crimes. Meaning, there's nothing illegal about enslaving prisoners. And if we look back at the Bible, there were two types of slavery. And one, what we call the Hebrew slave, that was more like the word Eved means both slave and servant. The word slave shouldn't even be used in the biblical sense. But in a sense, the Canaanite slave was more of a slave, and the Hebrew bondsman was an indentured servant. Now, I've worked in the prison systems. I've seen people who, if they weren't a criminal before they got into the system, they made one little mistake that cost them their freedom. By the time they got out, being surrounded by other criminals, by having them as a role model, well, they came out as hardened criminals. And often they had recalcitrance, just went right back to the life of crime. But if life dealt them a bad deal of cards, and they wind up committing a crime, which they deserve to be punished, well, how should that crime be punished? Should it be punished by locking you up with other criminals? Or Should you go join a family who's going to be a role model for you, who's going to give you self-worth, who's going to take care of you, give you work to do? Which one is better? I think the idea of indentured servitude is a much better for the criminal, because it's going to turn his life around. It's going to help him get back into society. You know? So there are certain things that we've thrown away and replaced them with things that are much worse. Now, that doesn't mean that you're allowed to abuse a servant. No, a servant has human rights. The Bible makes that very clear. Even the Canaanite slave has basic human rights. I'm not saying we should reinstitute Canaanite slavery. That was a vestigial thing of the past that was permitted but not commanded, as our rabbis teach it. Indentured servitude would probably be a much better system than the current penal system, and there are aspects of that. They do try to, offer education and work and things like that to people in prison. But sometimes yes, sometimes no. Well, it's the point I would say all of this. I might need to make another video about this because I didn't really get to the point yet. Is we have a lot to learn from the past. We cannot just throw the past in the dustbin. We are here because of the heritage of the past. You wouldn't, if not for the Bible, the atheist would have no hope, would have no freedom. We have our society today because it's built upon the ideals that the Bible brought forth. What do I mean by that? Meaning, the Bible was radical in its time. Monotheism was radical and iconoclastic in its time. So too, the religions that are much bigger than the original religion of the Bible, that spread these ideas, as Maimonides says, through God's great wisdom, even though to our suffering, but through God's infinite wisdom, God allowed religions like Christianity and Islam to spread. Because although atrocities have been committed in the names of those religions, for the most part, those religions have made the world a better place and brought the world closer to God in an imperfect way, but brought closer. And really, essentially, America, if you look in the writings of Rizal, certain ideals of the secular Enlightenment, I'm not talking about the Jewish Haskalah movement, but the Enlightenment that took place in the Western world, that led to America. Although they were aspects that were rebelling against the traditional religions that were practiced, the church body, and rightfully so, like we discussed earlier. Those things needed to be reformed. Like we just said, they're in imperfect form, so there needed to be steps to come to a more perfect society. These were really going back to the roots. They were really a revival of what the Bible wants from us. The American Revolution was firmly rooted in the Bible. Not in the church, but in the basic ideals of ethical monotheism. Although the church had a hand in it too. And the church developed and reformed because of it. The Episcopal Church, although it's officially the Anglican Church in America, is still different than the Anglican Church in Israel, because it's an American Episcopal Church. And the other churches that were illegal in many colonies were certainly the fulfillment of the American ideals. I mean, there's few things I can think of that are more American than what I heard a story that when in colonial America, there was preachers who were jailed for preaching without a license because they weren't a part of the official church. From the bars of the jail, they would preach, and hundreds of people would gather around Sunday morning to hear them preach. That's America to me. Again, it's still an imperfect form. I'm not saying, but we have what to learn from the past. That's my message here. We cannot throw away everything just because either our forefathers made mistakes or they were trapped in vestigial aspects of their culture that they had no control over. If you really study it, Washington, Jefferson all wanted to get rid of slavery. They really wanted to abolish slavery. It was not in their power to do so. It was almost not in Lincoln's power to do so. He paid a big price for that. The answer is to find that middle ground, to find moderation, not to be too extreme on either side, like we said in the previous video. And in that way, we can learn from the past, and we can preserve and conserve that which we need, because without that, we wouldn't be living the lifestyles we live today. A lot of people like to say negative things about Islam. If you knew what the Arab world was like before Muhammad, you would know that Muhammad made his part of the world a much better place. And if you study the history of Islamic history and culture, there were many high points in history where Muslims were more scientific, more worldly, more cultured than Christians, and Christians were still in the Dark Ages. And Christians who lived under Muslim rule prospered, and Jews who lived under Muslim rule prospered. Something happened at a certain point in history where they went backwards. It wasn't that long ago. was only about 500 years ago. In the big scheme of things, considering Islam is about 1400 years old, it was only about a third of their history, and things reversed. There are still aspects of the Muslim society that want to go back to the old ways, which were much more progressive. But there are different things in different places, and really America is going to give that freedom more to that society, I think, to go back to olden, as opposed to the dark ages that much of their community is still in. And that's why people are coming here. Well, point is, learn from the past. Find the good things. Find what lessons we can learn from the mistakes so we don't repeat them. Because quite often people are still repeating the same mistakes. Don't be extreme too much on one side or the other. Maimonides says try to find the middle path. That's what's healthy, that's what's normal. That's what you got to do. Alright, well, it's time to go to work. Thank you so much if you made it this long. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. I think this is a very important message. I wish I could make it more succinct. You know, part of this exercise of me making these videos is I learned to bring this out. Whatever, I can't talk anymore. Alright, thank you. God bless you.